old issues. It was over 100 years ago that the term sweatshop was coined because the women, all women who were immigrant workers who worked on the line and had been subcontracted out by garment jobbers, mainly worked in tenements in New York, the work was sweated out of them by the independent contractors or the subcontractors who were above them. And that's been a practice that has been used traditionally in construction and in agriculture and in many other industries, either subcontracting work out so that the person above you is typically an undercapitalized person who themselves is struggling and cannot afford to pay you minimum wage or such things, or just labeling people independent contractors. And that label of independent contractor versus employee really matters in the United States. If I am an employee, I am entitled to minimum wage, I am entitled to overtime pay, I am entitled for protection against discrimination, I am entitled to join a union. If I lose my job, I get unemployment insurance. If I am an independent contractor, of course, all of those things are off the table. This is a phenomenon that we're seeing in many, many more industries than we had in the past. Some people are now calling it the fishering of the American workplace. And it's something that we believe all of us should care about. If I am an independent contractor or I am employed by an undercapitalized subcontractor, I will simply not be able to have a middle-class life. I will have no benefits. I will not be entitled to the labor protections that we've talked about earlier. In addition, and this is extremely important at this moment in our nation's history, state and federal government lose billions and billions of tax dollars from employers who misclassify their workers as independent contractors and are not paying any kind of payroll taxes. And we'll talk a little bit more, Christina will talk about the environmental impacts. NELP was interested in this study in part because of its innovation and in part because port truckers and truck drivers are a group of workers who have been transformed from an employee model to an independent contractor model over a relatively short period of time. We were also interested in taking a look at these drivers in a really systematic way. So with the help of Tom and his students and other experts around the country, we came up with this interview, very lengthy interview questionnaire of about 82 questions. And we interviewed drivers here in Seattle, and the same interview was used for 10 drivers in LA, 10 drivers in Oakland, and 10 drivers in New York, and 30 or so we interviewed here, which was, again, another shout out to the students and others, very, very labor intensive. Shout out to the folks who brought the workers to their interviews and to the workers themselves who are willing to spend this time with us. Because sometimes we were spending an hour and a half, a long time to go through and really talk to the workers about their experiences. The second thing that we did was to look at their contracts and whatever other documents they wanted to give us. So we reviewed literally hundreds and hundreds of pages of documents from the workers, from their page stubs to their logbooks, to their fuel deductions, to their contracts, to the meeting agendas, all sorts of things, so that we could try and get a picture. And from the questionnaire, we developed kind of a matrix of questions that we then cataloged so that we could determine whether these workers should be considered employees rather than independent contractors. And for anyone who sort of knows a bit about employment law, the definitions of who is an employee are different under different laws. We used the most stringent definition of who is an employee with the longest list of factors to determine whether you're an employee that we could come up with, and that's the Internal Revenue Services definition. And we did that because our reasoning was, if we could determine that these workers should be employees under the IRS definition, they would be employees under every other definition. So the easier, more generous standards to get unemployment insurance or to get workers' comp or to get minimum wage and overtime would necessarily be true. These workers would be employees under those definitions. So our results were, it was inescapable that these workers were misclassified as independent contractors and should be considered employees when we put those 20 factors overlaid over the facts that we got from the workers. And I'm going to just talk a little bit about some of those findings. The companies set the rates that they pay the workers without any kind of negotiation. It was the company who did it. And I'm just going to ask you to think a little bit about, folks who are in business for themselves, who you might have some dealings with in your life. The folks who come and fix your computers at your home or your office, or someone who paints your house, or someone who does electrical work in your home or your office. And contrast that a little bit with what was the experience of these workers. So one of the contracts on the business of the rates said, rates are based solely on what the company may determine. So I don't know about you, but when someone comes to fix my refrigerator, I don't say to them, I'm going to pay you just what I want. They tell me what they're going to charge. That was not the case for these workers. The companies set the other major component of what someone takes home in their pocket each day as well, the amount of work. 2/3 of the contracts that we looked at said that the companies did not guarantee any of the workers any single amount of work. So the workers were required to have their trucks available exclusively to the company at all times, but the company did not say, I'm going to give you a single container. You just sign this document and you're an employee. We asked them because independent businesses are supposed to be entrepreneurs and supposed to be able to figure out ways that they can earn more money. And we asked all of them, how do you think you could earn more money? And most of them just kind of laughed at us. But most of them, just like any other low-wage worker, said, well, maybe I could work more. But that was the only way they could think of to earn more money. They were clearly not folks who had a business plan and a business model. Most of the drivers had, well, all of the drivers, had only one truck. They had no employees. It was just them and their truck. They did not have other people that they could dispatch to work for different companies. All of the drivers worked for just one company at a time every single day, sometimes for long periods of time, and most of them had worked for the company that they were now employed by for 3 years or more. 2/3 of them said that. Again, I don't know about you all, but if I have someone come install a telephone at my office, someone who really is an independent business, they don't come and stay for 3 years and only work for me. They have a variety of clients that they work for. Not true for these drivers. These were not people who advertised in the phone book or had even their own trucks with their own labels and their own business name on them. They simply had a job, signed a contract for one employer, and continued to work for that employer for as long as they could. The drivers do have contracts, and the contracts very carefully and very methodically recite that the drivers are independent contractors and not employees. And some of the contracts we thought were kind of creative. They would refer to the driver as your company, as in your company wishes to do business with our company. But of course, there was no company for any of these workers. It was one guy and one truck. A lot of the contracts also said things like that insurance was optional. You could get your insurance from the company, but you weren't required to. But 52 of the 54 drivers that we talked to bought their insurance from the company, and many felt that was a requirement. In fact, one driver said to us, you cannot have your own insurance to work for my company. It's part of the deal. You work for us, you need insurance, you use our insurance. So over the course of kind of each of these factors, we found that almost every indicator that a person should be treated as an employee was there for these workers. And I think I'll sort of stop there, but I do want to say that this isn't the only study that has ever been done of port truckers, and if you read our study, you'll find that there's about a dozen other studies, and we kind of stayed away from some of the things that had already been determined by other studies, and I just want to go through a couple of those. 82% of port truck drivers around the country are in this model, are considered independent contractors and not employees. The average work week for port truckers across the country, 59 hours, so well above 40 hours that should trigger overtime pay. The average earning around the country is around 29,000. It looked like here in Seattle it was slightly higher than that, but still fairly low level, poverty level wages, which we calculated in many circumstances would mean that people would qualify for Medicaid still. I'll let other folks talk about this a little bit more too, but the economic pressures on these workers are enormous and really encourage health and safety violations. If the best thing that you can do to put food on the table for your family is to drive as fast as you can and ignore some of the safety rules along the road and not have the equipment that is legal under the traffic safety and other regulations, that's what you do. And other folks can talk in a little bit more detail about that. We have some recommendations as well, but I think that's probably a place where Rebecca should talk. What I would just end with is what we found is a real industry-wide problem, and we think it demands an industry-wide solution, and one that requires all hands on deck. Federal agencies, state agencies, private litigation, all of those tools in a lawyer or policymaker's toolbox. Thank you.
Before Rebecca gets to some of the national solutions that Becky was talking to,